Hello everyone, this is Chris Jamel at Exiton Interactive, and in this video we are going to start adding in the validation logic for our authenticator component. So we have previously created the interface here, and we have these little red X's to show that the validation for this particular validator is incorrect or is not valid. So we're going to add the logic to make this to be a check mark or an X, which means that we're going to have our controls dynamically changing to be valid or invalid based on the user's input. This one is going to be two videos. It's going to be a fairly long bit to get this part done. And I do want to remind you before I forget that you can find a link to the article for this video in the description below. And without further ado, let's jump back to the code here. Go to Visual Studio Code. And actually, also sticking with tradition, what we're going to do first is make an adjustment from some previous code. And notice I say it's an adjustment. This is definitely not an error. We won't count it as an error since it's just a helpful thing we're going to add. So if we remember, we added the URI parser service. So Angular is injecting this URI parser service into the constructor of our class. And since it's being injected, this is the only time that this thing is going to be, we're not going to new a new one. We're not going to create a new URI parser. So what we can do is to say that this is read-only. So the URI parser service should be read-only. Like I said, that's not an error. It's just a helpful thing to add for us to make sure in the future that we don't try to override that. And so the first thing that we're going to do in this new video is to go to our template file. And what we want to do is to modify our validator Mixin. And I'm telling myself, since I've done this video about 5 times now, I have this memorized, so no need to look at any notes. As we're aware, if I don't look at notes, I'm going to forget something. So let's just bring those up and we'll come back here. So what we need is to pass in some more information to our validator Mixin. So the first thing I'm going to pass in is a key. The second thing is what I'm going to call error. So the key is going to be the key for the control that we're dealing with. So it's going to be one of these keys that we've added in the past. So for instance, we'll say in the call control username key, which so that will be the key. The error is just going to be a string, which is the name of the error that we will be looking for. All right. So what we want to do down here is to modify our icon. So right now we're just statically adding this .fa-times, so we're adding the font awesome times CSS class. What we're going to do is delete that. We'll put our parentheses in here, and what we want to do is to add a class dynamically, and to do that we are going to say we're going to put the square brackets. Inside the square brackets we'll say ng class, and then we'll say ng class is equal, and we're going to use the backticks here because we're going to use some string interpolation. What we're going to do is we're going to call a method on our TypeScript class to find out what the icon should be, and I'm going to cleverly name that get validator icon class. Again, it's a function call, and the first thing that we're going to pass into that method call, the first thing we're going to pass into that method is the key. And then the second thing, what we're going to do here is we're going to put in single quotes. And inside of those single quotes, we are going to put in the error. So the reason that we're doing this is that when we pass this in without the single quotes, Angular is going to be expecting that to be a property on our class that we're passing in. And then the single quotes are going to indicate that we want this to be a string. Okay? So what I mean by the property, what we're going to do, like I said, for instance, we're going to put in the method or the Mixin call. We're going to say control username key. So that's going to be control username key, and this is going to be control username key. It's going to be the value of the control username key, and what that is control username. Okay, and if we look back at our TypeScript file, we have a getter of the control username right? Which is going to then provide us the actual form control, the username form control into our method, okay? So let's just do it and it'll make more sense probably. So let's go up here and we'll say comma and control username key, and we're going to call this, the name of this error, to be unique. I'm going to copy this because we're just going to keep using it, and then I'm going to say for this one required, for this one min length, this one string max length, and this one I just call regex invalid. So there's nothing super special about the name of these errors that we're passing in, the strings. It's just that they have to match up with the errors that will be applied to the actual controls. So if you validate using the Angular built-in validation and you set a min length, if the min length is not true, Angular has an error, which is this is the name of the error that they use. So I'm just sticking with the ones that they have, and then, you know, creating my own for ones that are not available. So we've done that for the username. Let's keep going. We'll do control password key, and then this one will be required. Copy this again. So this one is min length again. Max length. This one I called one lower, one capital, one digit, and the hardest one of all is one non-alpha numeric. Alphanumeric, okay. And then we come down here and we'll do this one. This one is the control password confirm key. Control password confirm key. And what do we want this one to be? No match. Come down here to our email, control email key. Required. Control email key. And I called it email regex. Last but not least, control email confirm key and no match. So what we'll do is save that. And what we'll do now is we will go into the TypeScript file, into our class, and create that method. So public, the name, getValidator icon class. That thing's going to take in a control, which is a form control. We'll have to import that here in a second. And the other part was error. It's a string. We want it to give us a string. So let's get that in there. Let's return to the import section. In the forms package for Angular, we're going to import the form control. So now we have no error there. It's just mad that we're not giving it in a string. So let's just return the string that we were using before. So the font awesome times class. And up here, just so that we can see everything is working, we're going to use our friendly console log. We're going to output the control, give us a space, and output error. Let's go ahead and save that. As usual, the watch is running, so it's going to build for us. We'll return and refresh, and we'll look in our browser, and we see that in the console window we are in fact receiving an object as the first argument and the string for the error as the second. We'll close that. We'll go back and we'll actually make this thing work for us. And to do that, all we're going to do really is let's just delete what we just made. We'll say const has error. So we'll create a has error variable here. And that's just going to be control.hasError. And the error we're looking for is the one we're passing in. Next, we're going to say we're going to return if has error is true, we'll send out the FA times class. If not, it's the font awesome check. Save that. We'll go back, and of course, before we refresh, you'll see that we had the red X's all over the place because we were just returning the font awesome times. Refresh. Now we have just all green check marks because of course we don't actually have any validation going on. So we'll return to our TypeScript file here, and it's probably instructive if we find out how we would do this with just the provided validators from Angular. Even if it wasn't the case that they don't actually provide all that we need, I would probably have to make up others just to make it more difficult than vanilla here. But what we're going to do here for the time being is import another name from the forms, and that's validators. So we'll go back down here. We'll deal with maybe the username control, and we'll replace this null statement with a call to the validators dot, and let's say min length. And we are, for the Angular ones, we just pass in, for min length, we pass in the minimum length value. So let's save that. And we'll go back to browser and refresh. So one of the things that we're going to have to adjust, is I don't like the behavior of the min length validator. As you can see, username is empty. Min length, we said 3, I think, and we're still getting the green check mark. It's not what I want when the thing is empty. But let's go ahead and put in a letter. We'll put in the A, so we have one A in there, and we get the red X. The thing is not valid, 2 of them, 3 of them, and it now validates fine, right? And so let's return back here. So there is the instance in which, there's only 2 of them in which there was only one validator. The rest of them have many validators. So let's deal with how to compose them with the username. So let me get rid of this, and we'll say validators.compose, and the compose is a function, and it expects an array. We'll just give us a little more room to look here. And that array is validator functions. So this composing this min length would be the same as just putting min length on there on its own. But now we can add in more, and we're going to say validators.maxLength, and we're going to give it a max length of 4. So now it has a min length of 3 and a max length of 4. So let's return to the browser and refresh. So we were messing with the username again. So let's put in 1A, it's invalid, 2, 3 is valid, 4 is valid, and 5, we get the X on the max length. So that's how we would do it using what Angular provides. Of course, we can't just do that. So let me turn this back to null. And actually, let me get rid of the validators call up here because we don't need it. Save that. And we're going to return to the forms folder that we created. We're going to right click on it and choose new file. And I'm going to create a file called form.validators.ts. And we're going to basically create the same sort of structure that Angular is using. So what I'm going to do is export class, and again, name it whatever you want. So I need to come up with a name here. Just sticking with what I've already written, and the fact that the company's name is Exciton Interactive, I usually tack on something related to that. So we'll say XC Validators. Might not want to use that. I might, create some kind of package at some point in time that uses that. So you might want to pick your own name, or you can, for this learning session, just use the same thing. Doesn't matter. And so what we'll do, the first thing here is basically create the same thing that Angular did. As far as what we'll do is we'll say public static, and we'll have a function called min length. We'll leave the arguments blank for the moment. So what we expect from min length is for it to give us a validator function. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll say import. So we'll bring in a few things from the forms namespace, and this one is again lost the train of thought. Oh, validator function. So we want our method or function here to give us a validator function. Great. And of course, it's complaining to us, so we need to do that. One thing we're also going to need up here is the form control. So a validator function, what we need to return. So we need to return a function. The validator function is one that takes in a control, form control, and outputs an object. For the time being, what we are going to do is simply use the validators that are provided, and what I need to do is to say return validators dot, and we'll say min length. That min length, oh well, first let's deal with that, the fact that we have to pass in a length. We're going to need to pass in, the reason we're doing this is to add additional functionality, and we're going to need more information passed into our min length. So what I'm going to do is, instead of, we could, have multiple parameters, but what I like to do is to have an object, basically, especially since it's so easy to create them in JavaScript. First off, though, I'm going to create an interface for this object. And let me call it, let's say export interface, and I call it length validator config. So length validator, it'll be the same interface for dealing with the min value, min length, and max length. And we want to have passed into it a length, which is a number. So over here we'll say config and length config. So now we have the access to a number. So let's save that. So basically all I've done is made it more complicated to call the validator from Angular for the time being. So let's return to our TypeScript file, and we're going to import the class that we just created. Oops. Forms and validators. We'll import here is XC validators class. Let's return back. So we are picking on the username control, so let's go back to it. So all we'll do now is just say XC validators dot min length, and now our min length requires an object and length 3. So we'll save that, turn to the browser, refresh. We're back. We got our check mark when it's empty, which we'll fix here in a second. 1. And where's our little X going on? We return back. Take a look at what we were doing. Min length is 3. Just about every time this catches me. And another good reason to look at the notes, right? So we're not supposed to be returning a validator function, which is what min length is returning. We're supposed to return an object that says whether or not the control is valid with relation to this error. So what we need to do is to take the validator function that we're getting from this call and give it the control. Great. Now we'll save it. Go back and refresh. And again, check mark. Now we got our X. And 2 A's, 3 A's, the check mark comes back. All right. So now one incremental change here. I don't like the behavior that if the input is empty, it still validates min length wise. So let's change that. So what we'll say is that c.value.length, if that's equal to 0, I want to return an object. Otherwise, we'll use the Angular validator. And the object I need to return, it says min length. And make sure I'm losing my mind. Pretty sure it's all lowercase. Yes, min length. And we'll say true. So now this will tell us that it has a min length error on it. Save that. Turn to our browser. Refresh. Now we've got our X for 0 input. 1A, 2A, 3A goes away. Perfect. Exactly what we wanted. Now, if we want, actually let's go back, talk about this for a second. So if the user's logging in, we don't care about the email or the confirm email or the confirm password for that matter. All we care about is the username and password. Well, the way we are creating this component is our inputs will all be here. You just won't be able to see all of them, and you won't have any access to them. And they'll all still have their validators applied to them. So for instance, we have confirm password has to match the password. Well, if you can't access it, you can't type into it, and you can't match it. So what we need is a way to say, you could either in your class file, you could either say have a conditional for applying the validators themselves, add only the ones you need when you need them, or I'm going to take the other route. I'm going to add all of the validators, but I'm going to add the ability to say if this case is true, don't apply this validator. Okay, and let's see if this will make more sense here when I do it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create another interface. In this one, I'm going to call Validator config. It's basically the base interface that they'll all inherit from or extend in TypeScript language. I'm going to have a method or a function on them, optional function called skip. Skip is a function that takes 0 arguments and returns a boolean. And then I'm going to say that the length validator extends the validator config. Okay. Now that we have that, what we can do now is return to the validator function. What I'm going to do here is say if, and then I'm going to say xc validators. We're going to call a function that doesn't exist yet. So a function that says skip validation. We're going to pass in the control, and we're going to pass in the config. If skip validation returns true, we are going to return null. So no validation. If it returns false, then the validation will proceed as usual. So let's create our function skip validation. So it's just basically a helper function, static skip validation, and it's going to be equal, I don't know why it shows the fat arrow, it doesn't matter here since they're static methods. What we're going to do is pass in, and I guess I really don't need the control, but we're future proofing things. Form control and the config, which is an validator config. I'm just going to copy these. First bit, the reason why I'm making the helper function is we're going to check to make sure that the configuration exists, it's not undefined or null. We're going to make sure that the skip function exists, it's not undefined or null. If either of those, either of these conditions are true, we'll return false. Otherwise, we're going to just return the result of calling config.skip. Okay, I'm going to save that. And just to see, for example, how this works, we already saw that the config is working here. What we're going to do, in addition to passing in the length of this, let's see, what we can do is just say and skip. What we'll do is skip, and return this is login. So if the user is logging in, we won't validate the min length of the username. So let's return here. Whoops, and I'll refresh this, and I'll actually have the account register open, refresh. So you can see no validator popping up here. Nothing happens. If we go back to the register, it's X when it's empty, 1, 2, 3. So the validation depends on our skip function, just as we had expected. So this is working now. What we want to do is to recreate the ability to compose functions, validators. So let's return to our validators, the form.validators.ts file. And this one gets a bit hairy here, so let's talk about this one. Okay, so what we want is a function public static compose. We'll deal with what it takes in a second. It will return a validator function by the time we're done. And the best way maybe to talk about it is to look at what it will look like when we're done. So this is the call to the compose method, or the way that it will look when we're done. I'm just going to get rid of them. We're going to bring it down to 2 possibilities. I'm going to put comments so it gets rid of our squigglies, and we'll take a look here. So what I'm doing here is I'm calling the compose method, which we're making now, and we're going to pass in an object to it. Okay, so compose is going to take an object. Now let's not do it there. We'll call the object validators. Okay, so the object is taking in is called validators, and like I said, it's an object. But we can do better than that, because so for example, on this max length one, what we're going to be passing in is a validator. Okay, so let's go back, make sure I type this all right. So what it's going to do is going to be a function. That function is going to return to us a validator function. Okay. And I guess I should have called this something. And yeah, so validator. So the validator's object is going to have, well, let me back up a little bit here. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves because we need the key. So it makes more sense if we would just do it from the start here. So it's going to take in, it's going to have a key indexer of a string. This thing is going to return an object. That object is going to have a property called validator. That property is a function which returns a validator function. Now it's going to take in a config object, maybe not, and we're going to put type any. Many different types of validator functions. Close this. And so that will take care of the validator, right? Well, we also need to have a property on it called config. Right? So we'll say config, may or may not be true. We'll say any on it. Now, for the inputs, like the user, or like say the email, right? It's going to have more than one validator, so we're going to compose it. But then we would not want to have any of those validators applied, say, if the user is logging in. So to make that simple, what we're going to do is pass in as a argument here a function, our good old skip function. So maybe, maybe not. And again, that's just a function that takes in 0 arguments and gives us a Boolean at the end, right? So that's basically the class here. And I guess I could have semicolon. No. Okay, so that takes care of that. And what we'll do is start creating this thing. Okay, so let's say const v collection, so validator collection, and our validator collection is going to be validator function array, and it's going to start off empty. Next, we've already talked about it. We've actually already imported this particular thing from Lodash, so we're going to import the for own function from Lodash. And we'll return down to our notes here. We'll say Lodash. What we'll pass into it is, of course, our validators. So we have validators. And I've made this comment every time I've done this video here, and I'm going to make it again. I have no idea why I named this thing to be O. I have a background in mathematics, so at 99.9% of the time I'll make that X, but for variety we're going to leave it as O. Next we're going to come in here, we're going to say const config is equal to O dot config if it exists, otherwise it'll be an empty object. And we'll say config.skip is equal to the skip function that we're passing in, or skip method that we're passing in. And then we'll say vCollection.push, and what we're going to push onto that is the result of saying o.validator, passing in the config object. And so that will push in everything that's on the object that we're passing into compose into this v collection, and then we're free to say return, and then all we're going to return is Angular's validators.compose, or the result of calling the compose method on our v collection. Okay, let's get rid of that, and then we'll save, return here, and let's see if we can actually make this work. So let's basically, we'll delete that and give us some more room. I don't know why that went out there, and we'll say validators.compose function call. We need an object, and as usual, like we said, the object is indexed by strings, so say max length. It actually doesn't matter, you know, we're not using the key here, that property name, so you can name it whatever you want. But this is an easy way to know what this validator is applying for. In the case of the max length, it's very obvious, but we will be using regular expressions, and then I don't want to have to stare at a regular expression to figure out what it is I was trying to figure out or to test for. So let's come back here, we'll say max length, and of course that's a property which returns an object, and that object has a validator property, and it's xc validators dot, oh well, that's going to be hard because we haven't made the max length yet, so we'll say min length dot min length, and we're going to pass in the config, and that is going to have a property of length. We'll give our length of 3 again. Great. And just to check that we're back to where we were before, like I said, we'll put our skip function down here, and what we were skipping before is return this dot is login, so that will skip if we're logging in. So just to test to make sure that we're back where we were, let's refresh everything. If we look at the login, again, no X there. Put in whatever we want. We go to register. We have our X on the min length, 1, 2, 3, and a check marks. So we now are at the point where we can start composing validators together to create the sort of complex validation that we need for our individual components. And I think, let's take a look here. Yes, it's right at, or a little bit after the 30-minute mark, so we're going to end this video now, and we will finish up this line of thought in the next video. I, of course, do want to start as far as creating a tradition here of thanking everyone for watching the video, as well as mentioning that if you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comments section below. If there's plenty more that we have to do on this authenticator component, and there's many things that I've already thought of that we need to do in general for an ASP.NET application, web application. But if you have any suggestions about what you'd like to see, I would like to start making a list of requests. So please also leave those in the comments below, and I will talk to you later. And again, once again, thank you for watching the video.